If General George S. Patton had made the obvious decision, this city would have been reduced to rubble, and no one would have questioned it, because that's exactly what everyone expected him to do. September 1944. Western Europe is collapsing under Allied pressure during World War II. Just weeks after D-Day, June 6, 1944, Patton's Third Army is moving faster than anyone thought possible. Hundreds of miles, German lines breaking, entire regions falling apart. For a moment, it feels like the war might end sooner than anyone predicted. And then, everything stops. On September 1st, 1944, Patton's army doesn't slow down. It freezes. Not because of enemy fire, not because of terrain, because it runs out of fuel. Every single day, his army consumes nearly 400,000 gallons. And when supply is redirected north for Operation Market Garden, his tanks simply go silent. 5 days. From September 1st to September 5th, 1944, one of the most aggressive forces in Europe stands still. And those 5 days change everything. Because while Patton waits, the enemy breathes. German command begins to reorganize. Under General Johannes Blaskowitz, defensive lines in eastern France start to take shape again. And one location suddenly becomes critical: the city of Nancy. A city that was never meant to be the center of a battle is now becoming a fortress. To the west, the Moselle River. Wide, fast, difficult to cross. To the east, elevated ridges of the Grande Couronne. Perfect for artillery and observation. Approach roads, already registered for fire. Bridges, mined. This is no longer just a city, it's a trap. And right at this moment, around September 7th, 1944, something even more unexpected happens. A letter arrives. Not from a general, not from intelligence, from a civilian, the mayor of Nancy, delivered to the headquarters of the U.S. 12th Corps, commanded by Major General Manton S. Eddy. The message is simple, almost unbelievable. Do not enter the city. Leave us alone. No threats, no negotiation, just a warning. If the Americans attack, the Germans will destroy everything before they retreat. The bridges, the historic buildings, the entire city, and the civilians will be caught in between. This wasn't speculation. They had already seen what happened to other cities. They knew exactly what liberation could look like. So the mayor did something no one expected. He asked the most aggressive general in the Allied army to go around. When General Eddy brings this letter to Patton, the room tightens. Everyone is waiting for the same reaction. Patton reads it, laughs, throws it aside, orders the attack. That's what should have happened. That's what always happened. But this time, something is different. Patton doesn't react. He pauses. He walks to the map, studies the Moselle River, the crossings, the roads leading east. And then he asks a question that changes everything. What if the city isn't the real objective? In that moment, the letter stops being a request. It becomes information. Unintentional, but precise. Because if the enemy expects an attack here, then the weakness is somewhere else. No one in the room fully understands it yet. But the decision forming in Patton's mind will do something no direct assault ever could. It will win the battle without destroying the city. And it will start with a move no one was looking for. The war didn't slow down. It stopped. And that pause almost cost everything. September 5th, 1944. Fuel finally reaches General George S. Patton's Third Army. Engines roar back to life, tracks begin to move, but something is already different. Because while Patton was waiting, the enemy was preparing. What had been a collapsing front just days earlier is now something else entirely. Stronger, organized, ready. And directly in front of the advancing American forces stands a city that has transformed in just 5 days. Nancy. The same city that sent the letter. The same city that asked to be left alone. But now, it's no longer just a city. It's a problem, a structural one. To the west, the Moselle River. Wide, fast, unforgiving. Any crossing point is exposed, any movement visible. To the east, the high ground of the Grande Couronne, elevated ridges, perfect artillery positions, a defender's advantage in every direction. And in between, Nancy sits exactly where it shouldn't, blocking the path forward. This isn't accidental. German command sees it too. Under General Johannes Blaskowitz, forces begin reinforcing the sector. Panzer Grenadier divisions move in. Engineers mine the bridges. Artillery is calibrated to cover every road. They are not guessing. They are waiting. Waiting for Patton to do what everyone expects. Attack. Because if he does, he walks straight into it. And then comes the first test. September 5th, 1944. Major General Manton S. Eddy orders a crossing attempt north of Nancy. Location? Pont-à-Mousson. On paper, it makes sense. German forces had been retreating for weeks. Pressure was constant. The assumption? They wouldn't be fully prepared. That assumption was wrong. As American infantry approach the Moselle, everything changes in seconds. Gunfire erupts from the opposite bank. Machine guns, artillery, elevated positions firing down. The river becomes a killing zone. There is no cover, no momentum. Units try to push forward and are forced back. Losses mount. The crossing fails completely. Now the situation shifts, because this wasn't supposed to happen, not like this. Eddy pulls back. His instinct is clear. Wait. Bring more artillery. Prepare properly. Try again in a week. It's the logical decision, the safe decision, the standard decision. And it's exactly what would have been done by almost anyone else. But Patton doesn't see it that way. When he arrives at the front and hears the plan, he doesn't react with anger. He reacts with something more dangerous. Understanding. Because he sees what others don't. Every hour they wait. The enemy gets stronger. More troops arrive. More defenses are built. More guns are positioned. The river doesn't become easier to cross with time. It becomes impossible. And that means something critical. Waiting isn't neutral. Waiting is losing. This is the moment where most offensives stall. Not because they're defeated, but because they hesitate. Because they choose certainty over momentum. Because they try to make the next move safe. Patton refuses. Not because he's reckless, but because he understands something most commanders don't. The window is closing, and once it closes, it doesn't reopen. So instead of reinforcing failure, he does something else. He starts looking elsewhere, not at where the battle just failed, but at where it hasn't happened yet. And somewhere south of Nancy, the terrain begins to change. The river bends. The defenses thin out, and a possibility appears. Small, risky, easy to miss, but real. And in war, that's all you need. The attack had failed. And now, everything depended on what happened next. Most commanders, after a failed crossing like Pont-à-Mousson on September 5th, 1944, would do the same thing. Pull back. Reorganize. Wait. Bring more artillery. Prepare a larger assault. Try again. Stronger. That was the safe move. That was the expected move. That was the wrong move. Because General George S. Patton understood something others didn't. The battlefield had already changed. Every hour of delay was not neutral. It was working against him. German forces under Johannes Blaskowitz were reinforcing positions across the Moselle. More troops arriving, more artillery deployed, more defenses built. The river wasn't becoming easier to cross. It was becoming impossible. And that meant one thing. If they tried again in the same place, they would fail again. So Patton did something different. He stopped looking at where the battle had just been lost, and started looking for where it hadn't happened yet. South of Nancy, the terrain shifted. The Moselle River curved. The defensive lines stretched thinner. Not because the Germans were careless, but because they couldn't defend everything. No army can, and that's where opportunity hides. Reconnaissance units begin moving quietly, carefully, looking for something specific, not the strongest point, the weakest one. Near a small town, Dieulouard, they find it. A section of riverbank where the current is slower, the far bank is lower, and German presence is limited, not empty, but vulnerable. This is not a perfect crossing. It's risky. There is no guarantee. And that's exactly why it might work. Because it's not where the enemy expects the attack. September 11th, 1944. Night falls. And with it, rain. Heavy rain. Visibility drops to near zero. For most operations, this would be a problem. For Patton, it's cover. There is no massive artillery barrage. No warning, no preparation fire, just infantry, boats, darkness, and a decision. Men from the 81st Infantry Division move to the river. Silently, carefully. Every sound matters. Every movement could give them away, because if they are detected, the crossing ends before it begins. They enter the water, cold, fast, unforgiving. Boats push forward into the darkness. No lights, no signals, just shadows moving across a river the enemy believes is secure. This is the moment. If this fails, there may not be another chance. And then, they reach the other side, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to hold ground, enough to survive, enough to change everything. Because once a foothold exists, the entire system behind it comes alive. Engineers move in, under pressure, under risk. They begin constructing a bridge, not a temporary crossing. A real one. Strong enough for tanks. By the morning of September 12th, 1944, it happens. American armor begins crossing the Moselle, south of Nancy. Not where the Germans expected, not where they prepared. And that changes the entire battlefield. Because now, for the first time, Patton isn't trying to break through the city. He's already past it. And that leads to a decision that defines the entire operation. He doesn't order an attack on Nancy. He gives a different order. Bypass it. This is where everything shifts, because a city only works as a defensive position as long as it can. Receive supplies, send reinforcements, retreat if necessary. Take that away, and the city becomes a trap. And that's exactly what's about to happen. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams leads the armored units forward. Fast, aggressive, relentless. They don't stop at the city. They move around it, cutting roads, seizing junctions, appearing where the enemy doesn't expect them. German reports begin to show confusion, units receiving outdated information, command losing coordination, because American tanks are now operating behind the expected front line. And suddenly, the strongest defensive position in the region is no longer protecting anything. It's surrounded. And the city that was supposed to stop Patton is now at risk of being cut off completely. By mid-September 1944, the battle for Nancy was already decided, even though almost no one inside the city fully understood it yet. There were no massive assaults, no endless artillery strikes, no waves of tanks crashing through the gates. And that is exactly what made the situation more dangerous. Instead of destruction, something quieter and far more decisive was unfolding. After the successful crossing on September 11th to 12th, 1944, General George S. Patton had shifted the entire structure of the battlefield. His forces were no longer facing the city from the west. They were already past it. American armor was now east of the Moselle River, moving behind German defensive lines, cutting through space the enemy believed was secure. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams pushed forward at a speed that German command struggled to comprehend. Roads were cut, supply routes disappeared, communication lines broke down, and reports began arriving that made little sense. American tanks were appearing at crossroads where they were not supposed to be, behind positions that were meant to be safe, along routes that were supposed to be used for retreat. At the same time, American infantry units advanced from the north and the south, tightening the pressure from multiple directions. This was no longer an attack. It was a system closing in. And at that moment, everything reversed, because a fortified city only remains strong while it is connected. Once those connections are gone, once supply and movement are cut off, the strength of the position turns inward and becomes a trap. German command recognized the danger and attempted to respond. Around September 18, 1944, a major counterattack was launched near Ericourt. Fresh armored units were brought in, including Panther tanks, vehicles that were superior in firepower and armor compared to the American Shermans. On paper, the advantage was clear, and for a brief moment, it looked like this counterattack could break the American advance and reopen the situation. But the battlefield changed again. A heavy fog settled over the area, reducing visibility to just a few hundred meters. The long-range advantage of the Panther tanks disappeared, and the fight shifted into close-range engagements where coordination mattered more than raw power. American crews adapted faster. Their communication was tighter, their movement more flexible, and their tactics more responsive. They operated in smaller units, used terrain to their advantage, and engaged the enemy from angles that reduced the effectiveness of German armor. Slowly, the counterattack began to lose cohesion. Units became disorganized, momentum disappeared, and by September 22, 1944, the operation had effectively collapsed. German forces pulled back, and with that, the last real opportunity to break the encirclement was gone. Inside Nancy, the situation became unavoidable. Holding the city was no longer a viable military decision. Orders from higher command demanded resistance, but reality offered only one outcome. Staying meant destruction, and leaving was the only remaining option. On the night of September 14th to 15th, 1944, German forces began to withdraw. The movement was quiet, controlled, and urgent. Before leaving, they attempted one final action that could have changed everything. They tried to destroy the bridges, to deny access, to leave behind a broken city. But something unexpected happened. Members of the French resistance, already operating within the city, acted before the explosives could be triggered. They cut the detonation wires. The bridges remained intact. On September 15, 1944, American forces entered Nancy. They did not fight their way in. They walked in. The streets were still standing, the buildings were untouched, and the historic center, including the Place Stanislas, remained exactly as it had been before the battle began. The city that had expected destruction survived. And this is where the real meaning of the story becomes clear, because this outcome was not accidental. It happened because Patton refused to do what everyone expected. He did not attack the city directly. He did not force the gates. Instead, he made the gates irrelevant. The mayor had asked him not to enter the city, and in a way, that request was honored, not by stopping the advance, but by changing how the objective was achieved. This was not just a victory of movement. It was a victory of thinking. Most commanders, when faced with resistance, push harder. Patton did something else. He treated the obstacle as information. He asked what it revealed about the enemy's expectations and where the real vulnerability might be. If he had chosen the obvious path, Nancy would have been destroyed, and the story would have been forgotten as just another battle. Instead, it became something different, a demonstration that sometimes the most effective move is not to attack where the enemy is prepared, but to change the conditions entirely. Nancy still stands today because of that decision,